Welcome to a world of dark legends and forgotten horrors. Tonight we unravel the mystery of the Hollow Gods, a tale of ancient curses, restless spirits, and a city that will never be the same. Settle in and listen closely. Beneath the kingdom of Vareth, beneath its stone towers and golden spires, lies something older than the empire itself. Whispers of a time long forgotten, an ancient relic, rumored to remain. The people call them the Hollow Gods, but they do not pray to them. They do not speak of them at all. Once Vareth stood as a beacon of civilization, its banners stretched high, its streets filled with merchants and scholars, alive with activity and a magnet of men. Now it was nothing more than an empty husk of its former glory, the capital a seemingly normal city. But beneath the foundation stones, beneath the weight of centuries, something waited, something watched. Renar knew nothing of such things. He was a man of dirt and death, a gravedigger by trade, paid in silence and coin. The finality of death, a certainty of his trade. He had buried nobles and beggars alike, yet none had ever stirred beneath his hands. The people of Vareth spoke in hushed tones of the Hollow Gods, of curses that lingered and whispers in the night. But to Renar, such fears were the fabrications of desperate men. Bodies turned to dust, and nothing lingered beyond. Then came the silver storm. Rain fell in thick, icy sheets, turning the streets into rivers of reflection. It was the kind of storm that dragged old things from the earth, that made the world feel ancient and raw. It was on that night that the steward of House Halvan came to Renar's door. Lord Halvan was dead. His burial was to be immediate, his body interred in the lower crypts, deeper than any had dug before, deeper than anyone should. Renar accepted without hesitation. A grave was a grave. He gathered his tools, pulled his cloak tight against the storm, and set off toward the burial site. The crypts beneath Vareth had stood for centuries and waited patiently for his arrival. Distant laughter bounced off the walls of the town, echoing through barren streets, filling Renar with a foreboding feeling. He told himself it was the storm, just the storm. The descent began in silence. Renar carried only a lantern and his resolve, though neither would last him long. The stairs stretched downward, their stone steps worn smooth by the feet of those long dead. The deeper he went, the colder the air grew, as if the crypt itself had forgotten the warmth of the world above. The walls narrowed, pressing in like grasping hands. The sigils etched upon them were unfamiliar, their meanings lost to time. They pulsed faintly, as though breathing. Renar's breath came shorter, shallower. The weight of the crypt bore down on him, thick and suffocating. Something lurked beyond the edge of the lamplight, a movement just at the periphery of vision, gone when he turned his head. Faint whispers teased from the shadows. He paused, gripping the handle of his lantern tighter. He was not alone. The burial chamber yawned before him, vast and untouched by mortal hands for generations. Ornate sarcophagi lined the walls, their lids askew as if something had stirred within. The floor was littered with shattered bones and rusted ceremonial blades, remnants of an ancient rite long since forgotten. The whispering grew louder, forming words Renar could almost understand. His lantern flickered as he stepped forward, drawn by something unseen. His fingers brushed against the lid of the nearest sarcophagus. The lid slid open on its own accord. Inside lay no corpse, no bones, only emptiness, save for a sigil etched into the stone, glowing with a pale, sickly light.
You are not the first. You will not be the last.
Renar recoiled, the air growing thick as a wave of cold washed over him. The sarcophagi around him began to shift, their lids scraping against stone as unseen hands forced them open. Shadows spilled forth, taking form, taking purpose. The hollow gods had woken, and they had been waiting. Renar fled, his pulse pounding in his ears. The crypt behind him seethed with whispering voices, shifting shapes that did not belong in the world of the living. He ascended the steps two at a time, feeling the weight of unseen eyes pressing against his back. The air changed the moment he breached the surface. The sky had darkened, the streets of Vareth cloaked in an unnatural stillness. The lanterns flickered, their flames twisting unnaturally, casting shadows that did not align with their sources. Something had changed. The city was awake in a way it had never been before. And then he saw them, the reflections in the windows, moving independently of their owners, watching him with hollow eyes. Renar pulled his cloak tighter, pressing through the empty streets. But every alley, every shop front, every polished surface contained a shadow of something that should not be. The people of Vareth moved strangely, their heads tilting at unnatural angles, their eyes too wide, too knowing.
Good evening, Renar. It's been so long.
Renar froze. The merchant standing before him was a man he had buried 3 years prior. His features were untouched by time, yet his skin was stretched too tight, his hands too still. The eyes were empty, reflecting nothing but endless blackness. And then the others stepped forward, people he had seen, lowered into the earth, their bodies burned, their flesh rotted away long ago. They stood in silence, watching, waiting. A child walked toward him, a little girl Renar recognized instantly. She had perished in a fire years ago, her screams never forgotten by the city. But here she was, unmarked by flame, her dress pristine. Yet her shadow twisted unnaturally behind her, reaching, writhing.
You shouldn't have come back, Renar.
He stumbled backward, horror gripping his chest. The dead were not simply rising. They were remembering. The voices in the walls, the whispers in the crypt. They had found him. Vareth was changing. Its people, its streets, its very bones. The hollow gods had not remained below. They had followed, and they were learning. Vareth was unraveling. The streets, once orderly and bright, had turned into chaos. The dead walked freely, whispering in voices that layered upon each other, memories of centuries past, spilling from their lips like a prayer no living man could understand. The priests of Vareth tried to burn them, to cast holy fire upon the risen. But the flames did not consume. The bodies stood unburned, the fire licking at them like a passing breeze. And then the priests themselves began to whisper. It was not resurrection. It was not undeath. It was something worse. The hollow gods were not merely returning. They were replacing. Renar moved through the ruins of his city, his hands trembling, his breath shallow. He had to go back. He had to return to the crypts. Somewhere beneath the earth, he had awakened something, and only there could he end it.
You brought them, Gravedigger. You opened the gate.
Renar didn't answer. There was nothing to say. He led them downward into the blackness of the crypt, through corridors now lined with shifting shadows. Figures moved along the walls, shapes cast by nothing. The deeper they went, the thinner the air became, thick with an unseen weight. And then they reached it, the heart of the hollow gods, a vast machine, neither dead nor living. Its surface rippled like liquid metal, yet held the weight of time itself. Symbols crawled across its face, shifting, unreadable. And in the center, the voice spoke.
You have returned. You have always returned.
Renar fell to his knees, Understanding rushed through him like cold fire. This was not the first time. The city had fallen before. It had risen before. And every time, the cycle had begun anew.
Vareth is memory. Vareth is repetition. You are not its keeper. You are its vessel.
The machine pulsed. The survivors behind him screamed as they were pulled into the walls, their voices adding to the chorus. Renar clenched his fists, resisting, feeling his mind split, stretch, become something else. The hollow gods did not demand. They did not scream. They did not rage. They simply waited. The vast machine pulsed, its liquid metal shifting, rearranging itself with a patience that spanned centuries. It had seen this before. It had seen him before. Renar staggered, the words, no, the understanding, piercing his mind like shards of glass. This was not a temple. This was not a tomb. It was a system, ancient and unfeeling, neither divine nor demonic. It was built for something else, something long forgotten. Visions struck him like lightning, burned into the backs of his eyelids. He saw Vareth, but not as it was. A city, once gleaming, once proud. He saw himself, but not as he was. His hands, hands that had never been his, building, carving, constructing.
The kingdom is not real. The kingdom is memory. You are memory.
Renar's breath came in short, ragged gasps. His heartbeat was not his own. His thoughts, not his own. He stumbled back, his boots scraping against ancient stone. Vareth had fallen before. It had risen before. And every time, it had been reborn. But not through will. Not through fate. Through correction. The hollow gods did not judge. They did not choose. They only ensured that Vareth would continue. They took those who faltered, who strayed, who questioned, and they rewrote them, made them fit. And Renar had stepped beyond his role. He had glimpsed the truth. And now he could no longer exist within it. Renar fell to his knees. The realization weighed on him heavier than any shovel, any grave. He was not fighting to save Vareth. There had never been a Vareth to save. It had always been a dream, a cycle, a recording, playing itself over and over. And he was merely an error, a flaw in the design. He had one choice left, to be rewritten, to become part of the cycle once more, or to deviate from the design. Renar stood before the heart of the hollow gods, the vast, shifting mass of metal and memory, its voice layered with all those who had come before. He felt its presence in his skull, its words not spoken, but impressed upon his mind, shaping his thoughts like fingers pressing into wet clay.
You are broken. You must be corrected.
He clenched his fists. The survivors around him had already begun to change, their limbs flickering between what they were and what the hollow gods intended them to be. Their faces twisted, shifting between familiar and foreign. They were being rewritten. Renar knew he had only moments before it reached him, before he too became another whisper in the endless cycle. The machine did not kill. It did not erase. It made corrections. He could let it happen. Let his mind be folded, smoothed, his past undone, and rewritten into something that fit. He could be made into something that belonged. Or Renar moved, not away, but forward. He lunged toward the shifting mass, his fingers finding the edges of the ancient sigil, the one carved deep into the heart of the hollow gods, the original marking, the first symbol of the cycle. Vareth tore itself apart. The streets bent inward, buildings unraveling into dust and reforming in the blink of an eye. Time looped, reset, played forward and backward all at once. He saw Vareth burning, rebuilding, thriving, collapsing. He saw himself, in every iteration, standing here, choosing, again and again.
You have always returned.
His body faltered, his vision blurred. He felt himself splitting, becoming both past and present, both observer and participant. The weight of countless cycles bore down upon him, and then silence. Renar opened his eyes. He was standing in the city square, the sky clear, the air still. Vareth stood as it always had, unchanged, untouched. Merchants called out their wares. Priests murmured prayers. The bells tolled the hour. It was as if nothing had happened. But something was different. The streets were too clean, the faces too familiar. People smiled at him, yet their eyes held something distant, something unreadable. A chill crept through him. He turned, looking at the people of Vareth, their movements precise, their laughter rehearsed, their reflections slightly out of sync, and he understood.
It begins again.